Neither are we a lawless country. We are a civil society, and order must prevail. Throughout our history, we've often faced moments like this because we are a big, diverse, free-thinking, and freedom-loving nation. In moments like this, there are always those who rush in to score political points. But this isn't a moment for politics. It's a moment for clarity. So let me be clear. Peaceful protest in America. Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. There is no place for hate speech or violence of any kind, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or discrimination against Arab Americans or Palestinian Americans. It's simply wrong. There's no place for racism in America.
Well, Susan Sullivan's a professor of law and politics at Temple University and joins us live now from Philadelphia. Susan, thank you very much for your time this evening. We just heard there from President Biden referring to the freedom of speech. How much is this situation being seen as a crackdown on free speech?
Well, I think it's being seen that way by a lot of people. I think also it's important to recognize that just your average American believes very strongly in free speech. It's embedded in the Constitution. It's the First Amendment for a reason. It's probably the most important because it does provide protection from the government, not from anyone else, but from the government, intruding on free speech, free religion, the right to protest peaceably, and freedom of the press. So these are embedded, almost sacrosanct in the United States. The question is, where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? And the ability to go out and speak freely and protest against the government, stand on the steps of the Capitol, stand in front of the White House, is very far-reaching. But it does draw the line at any kind of criminal conduct. If that speech is accompanied with violence or with destruction of property, just as that conduct would be criminalized separate and apart from the speech aspect. So the concern is that this is being seen as a way to silence the students who are protesting the way in which the Israeli government are acting in their war in Gaza. But it's also a protest, really, at the way in which their universities that, incidentally, they pay an awful lot of money to attend, the way in which those universities are investing their resources. So students at Columbia can't stop the war, but students at Columbia can protest and demand that their universities not engage in investments that are going to support that war effort, essentially.
And Susan, how much of a challenge have these mostly, let's be honest, mostly peaceful protests here across the US, how much of a challenge have they created for the Biden administration? And what are the potential implications of these protests to American politics?
Well, I think the implications are great. Young people generally tend to be somewhat disaffected with the political process. And in this particular election, there's a lot of indifference. There's a lot of apathy. I think students generally, certainly my students, tend to see the choice between Biden and Trump as not an attractive choice. This has galvanized attention. Students are demanding that their voices be heard. And I think this could be an issue somewhat similar to, for example, the abortion issue in the past, that is going to create divisiveness and perhaps create more support for whichever candidate, and that's going to be Biden, is more amenable to listening and perhaps even responding to their demands. I think it's important too, just on this issue of clamping down on free speech, to remember the day after President Trump was inaugurated, 500,000 predominantly women marched and protested in anticipation of the types of rollbacks of civil rights that they saw. Not a single arrest. No destruction of property, no threats, no violence, not a single arrest. Fast forward to January 6th, peaceful protest by Trump supporters who were challenging, somewhat bizarrely, the legitimate results of the 2020 election. Perfectly legal until that protest developed into a violent mob attacking the Capitol building, breaking property, trespassing. So I think that's a good example of where you can see the line between freedom of speech and speech that is going to be accompanied by violence. These have been, as you say, predominantly peaceful protests. So I think how this is going to play out is going to be very interesting. The encampments have been gone, are being taken away. The encampments are essentially trespassing on property. So it's if the government, the police, can couch this as criminal conduct separate from the speech, then they're going to be able to pursue prosecuting and removing the protesters and arresting them. But they're not going to be able to do that based on the content of their speech.
Well, Susan, thank you very much for talking to us here on TRT World. Susan Sullivan, live there from Philadelphia.